Welcome again to Earlswood Baptist Church House Group. This week the theme is compassion. We have another Bible Society Life Starter, and this week's stream is Just Life, not as in just in time or something, but as in justice, exploring themes of justice, compassion and peace throughout all areas of our life, personally and socially and globally. We have to admit that we do live in a very consumerist world that's far too competitive. Sometimes what we have seems to matter more than who we are. As we sit on our devices, social network replaces face-to-face relationships, however valuable that's been through COVID lockdown. For some of us, we don't meet our neighbours, let alone know them. It's a funny world we live in, isn't it? But the Spirit life stream, the actions we take are not the end goal. Our compassion is motivated by a genuine heart that's empowered by the love of God, and that embraces the possibility of positive change in our lives and in the world outside. So a remarkable aspect of this stream is the fact that it has a double effect. As we come alongside others, we too are helped. As we learn to develop a heart of compassion and to see the world as God sees it, we too are truly blessed. I'm sure many of us identify with the idea that we enjoy giving a gift more than receiving it. We're going to start with a video from Andy Clasper.
I think the life of Jesus was all about compassion and justice and peace and those kinds of qualities. I think so many of the stories that we know from Jesus' life, his what he did around the calling of Matthew the tax collector, the story of him with the woman at the well, the story of him and what he did with the woman who was caught in adultery. I think that those stories and countless others are stories of Jesus, his heart being moved with compassion for those that he saw around him, and him acting in a way which brought justice. So I think in each of those stories he sees Matthew in the tax collector's booth, and I think his heart is moved, and tax collectors are people that were untouchable, they were outcasts, but Jesus strides across through the crowd to Matthew. I can really imagine it, and Matthew must have said, well, this guy's been pulling crowds all over the surrounding area. What's he doing here with me? But I think the woman at the well as well. Similarly, Jesus' heart is moved for that woman, so he crosses social divides that others wouldn't have crossed, out of compassion for that woman. But it's not just, I think, compassion that is aimless. I think what Jesus was doing in all of those examples is actually saying very clearly, my place, where you will find me, is with the least and with the last of our society, of our world. And I think as believers, that's very much what we should be doing with our lives and saying with our lives. And I think also you see in those examples, Jesus was trying to make the world a better place, was saying things that were wrong and trying to put them right. So the story of the woman caught in adultery, I think what Jesus is saying, apart from let's have compassion for this woman, is it's wrong the way that you are treating women. There were two people involved in that adultery. I only see one of them here. So I think partly that was what he was saying. And I think Matthew the tax collector, what he was saying was, okay, so the business world, the world of tax collecting is sinful. The Pharisees were right in saying, why are you eating with these sinners, these tax collectors? And he's saying, well, I'm eating with them because through my influence, I want to change them. I want to change the way they do their business. I want to change this world. I want to be involved in every part of it. And I think, that's who Jesus was. He was somebody who got involved in everything, and through his personal influence, tried to bring a different world about. He tried to bring the kingdom where he was. That's what he said. Where I am, you'll find the kingdom. And I think that's who we need to be as Jesus followers.
Just summarising some thoughts from that video. Andy Clasper brings out very well, doesn't he, how Jesus' life changed the world around him. Never mind the cross and all the wonderful benefits of that, but just the way he lived. He had compassion on those he met, and he brought justice into situations. Thinking about the woman caught in adultery, for instance, he put things to rights for them. And you will often find Jesus with the least and the lowest. And this is often also the church's mission. It may not be for everybody, because salvation and the church are for all levels of society. But often the church is called to work among those who are least fortunate and need things putting to rights. Next we'll listen to Matthew 25, 31 to 46, parable of the sheep and the goats.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was ill, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was ill and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or ill, or in prison, and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
This is a vivid and quite challenging parable, isn't it? Describing the judgment of all the nations. When we look into the Old Testament, we often see the Messiah, Jesus, pictured as a shepherd. For example, it quotes here Isaiah 40 and Ezekiel 34. But in ancient Palestine, it was common for the sheep and goats to be herded together. And because they were scruffy-looking things, they often were quite hard to tell apart. And of course, we remember that the sheep are an Old Testament image for God's people. And also, right and left in Jewish culture symbolises blessed, cursed, or good, bad. A bit tough on people like me who are left-handed, really, isn't it? But you see the images of judgment that come all the way through this parable. But as well as referring to a future judgment, this passage challenges us to show compassion to the world today. Because as we serve others, we also serve Jesus. We bring the cup of water. This passage may seem to put works before faith, but I think realistically, if we're not displaying works like this, there's little evidence that we have faith. It's a bit like what James writes, isn't it? That faith without works is dead. It's interesting too, you may come across some people who interpret this passage, because of the context within talking about the kingdom of God, as helping people within the church, our brothers and sisters, not those outside. Even if this is true, I think the compassion that we show to people inside the church surely spills over to those outside. We see the same thing in Jesus' life. As he ministers to the people of Israel, his compassion spills out into those who are outside, the Gentiles. So before the usual questions, have another video from the musician Andy Flanagan.
So how did I start to realise that things weren't as they should be in this world? I think it goes back to be honest, being a student and doing a lot of work with Tier Fund during the summer, being away on Tier Fund teams, either to East London or Greenbelt we did a team to once, but learning, being exposed to many of the stories from folks who worked for Tier Fund, who were working in various parts of the world, who were explaining to me why people were in poverty, why people who were poor. You know, there's that famous quote, you know, people, when I serve the poor, people call me a hero, but when I ask why the poor are poor, they call me a communist. You know, this sense of wanting to get to the bottom, wanting to get in behind why certain countries were just in a terrible state, why certain parts of the UK were in a terrible state, and wanting to ask the questions and not just do the compassion thing. I think as the church down through the ages, we've been pretty good at the compassion thing, you know, seeing a need, it breaking our hearts and then going to meet that need. But as Martin Luther King said, you know, somebody's got to go back to the Jericho Road. You know, we're actually quite good at being the good Samaritan, but somebody's got to go back to the Jericho Road to work out how to stop everybody else getting mugged, you know, rather than just treating the victims all the time, waiting for the victims to be made and then helping them. Like, somebody's got to go back and have some discussions about how to improve the security of the Jericho Road. You know, where that might be more CCTV, you know, more police officers, more street lighting, but you can bet your life that those discussions take place in pretty dull committee rooms. Whereas actually it's more exciting to actually be hand to hand, face to face with the person you're helping. So as the church, I think we've been sucked in to doing more of that kind of the stuff that we really get a buzz out of. You know, the stuff that really, it feels good to help people in a very immediate way. But we're probably not so good at actually going back to work out how we stop more victims being created. You know, Desmond Tutu said we need to be not just pulling the bodies out of the stream, we need to be going upstream, seeing who's pushing them in. And so it's being involved in those political discussions and those things that fight for justice, rather than just relying on our charity or our compassion. These things that will leave things changed, that will change structures, that will change systems, that will change economics, that mean that there are less people to have to help. You know, because as the church, we could go back to that tough part of town every year. We could do a summer project there every year for the next 30 years. But why don't we want to be involved in actually the discussions in the town council to make sure that that place is better off, to make sure that there are more opportunities for the folks who grow up there, how they can get themselves and how they can work themselves to be freed from poverty, rather than us having to go and give handouts. So I think gradually the church is waking up to this, and so it's a privilege to be involved in some of the stuff with Christians in Politics and some of the other agencies who are working around this stuff, to try and encourage people to get involved politically, whether that means as local councillors, whether that means just in their local political parties, or whether that means campaigning, you know, sending letters, handing the postcards, to make sure that we aren't just treating the victims.
Andy Flanagan has had a long-term involvement with Tier Fund and has been an ambassador for them at times. But he brings out some very good points here, doesn't he? The church is often very good at compassion and looking after broken people. Obviously we have our failures, but on the whole we're pretty good. But are we involved in changing the root causes? I love the example he gives of the Good Samaritan. It's great to be a Good Samaritan, changing the victim, but wouldn't it be better if we went up the Damascus Road and stopped the muggers operating there And the same thing can be said about a lot of other situations. Perhaps the point to make here is that not to feel guilty if we are not doing things like this, but to say that there are opportunities for everyone to be involved in compassion and justice. They may be local rather than international. They may be tiny little acts of kindness, or they may be massive on a global scale. In all ways, the church should be involved. So as we come to reflect and respond, again, the shockers and blockers are there. What struck you in that passage in Matthew? What raised questions for you? As you think about it today, you may get no further than that parable, as it's quite deep and complex. But we might also ask ourselves, how good are we at encouragement, serving and compassion? Does it come easily and naturally to us? I think perhaps thinking about it, if you're like me, you may find that some areas are easy and some areas are difficult. And in what sense are we blessed as we bless others? Have you experienced this? Well, I enjoy thinking about those and talking about them in house group, and we'll come back with another live stream next week.